Fourth part. The snow swirled in savage confusion, turning the roof of the castle into a white peak. At the top of that mountain, a diminutive form climbed through the snow to place a pair of small wooden plaques. Folding his hands together before the modest grave markers, Lurie recited a short and simple prayer before going back down the snowy incline to D. The snowstorm was returning the sparkle to the world. Dawn was near. That keeps my promise to Mr. Cray. I'm going down the mountain, the hunter told the boy. I don't have time to look for your father now, but I'm sure someone else will be coming up here. The nobles who'd returned to life wouldn't be left to their own devices. Humans were no longer powerless. Perhaps he envisioned the future destruction of the castle. Lurie nodded. I know. I'll come up again on my own. Besides, I get the feeling I know what I should do just from having been up here. Dee gazed quietly at the rosy-cheeked boy. When I visit the village again someday, he said, I'll probably find a fine doctor here. Sobbing a little, Lurie said, But I'm not all that smart. Something that bordered on the miraculous occurred, though the boy probably didn't realize it. Dee extended his right hand and rubbed the boy's head. I don't know how smart you are, but you are brave, he said. It was a low and cold tone, yet still gentle. Braver than anyone. Lurie grinned. His little face was filled with pride. I'll never forget this, his expression declared. He'd never forget what he'd coaxed from the hunter. He'd seen Dee's smile. Dee turned toward the exit from the roof. Shall we go? Sure. The two of them walked back across the roof. After they'd advanced 5 or 6 paces, the door opened and a figure bounded out. It was Jeanne. Half her body was stained with fresh blood. Seeing the two of them, she shouted, The Duke! Lurie froze. He took down Budges. Run for it. From the crack in the door, a stark light coursed out, piercing the warrior woman's heart from behind, before stabbing into the ground at Dee's feet. It looked more like a long icicle than a spear. The exit from the roof burst outward. It wasn't an explosion. It had been blown apart by internal pressure. Deflecting the flying shrapnel with a single wave of his long coat, Dee gazed at the enormous golden figure who sailed down onto the roof. His landing made the roof shudder. Standing there with an icicle gripped in his right hand, and a long sword in his left was none other than Duke Gilson. But how completely he changed. Every human feature of his face was warped. The left side of his face, the lips were pulled up higher, and the few teeth that remained in his mouth gave a sense of less of idiocy and more of ghastly insanity. A twisted hand reached out toward Dee, and as the figure, badly stooped at the waist, pressed forward on similarly misshapen legs, he was more reminiscent of a spider than a human being. Where had the galactic drive led Gilson, and why had it brought him home? Back again, Gilson, Dee said, pushing Lurie toward a mound of snow and drawing his sword. But wait, Dee. Right now you lack the left hand that bolsters your regeneration. If you were to fall now, critically wounded, and that limb were carried off, your lord would be calling a certain gorgeous hunter back to his reward. Gilson extended his icicle spear. Though it looked like ice, it was a collection of free-floating molecules from the air, coalesced into a long spear that was harder than iron. Dee knocked it away. His blade shattered. Gilson also had a sword. When the nobleman made a diagonal swipe at Dee, the hunter parried the sword with his right fist. Catching the blade between his index and middle fingers, he stopped it. As Gilson was no ordinary noble, but rather had become a fiend of the universe, it was truly a divine display of skill by the hunter. However, look at how the sword blade split the area between the fingers, slicing through Dee's hand almost to the wrist. Gilson hauled back with the icicle spear. Dee had no left hand with which to block it, letting it a cry that might have been a curse on those who were cast out into the Milky Way, and that also seemed likely to drive all who heard it insane. Gilson tried to thrust his spear forward. Something happened. It was something to rival even the cosmic terror that lurked in the memory of the Milky Way. A miracle, even. Bloodlight shot from Dee's eyes, and it seared Gilson's eyes and brain. Still sunk in a snowbank, Lurie saw the thing that had been Gilson stagger and back away, as if frightened by some tremendously huge power. Dee jumped clear, swinging his right hand sharply. Flying from it to pierce Gilson's chest was the sword Gilson had used to split Dee's right hand. As the giant grabbed it by the hilt and tried desperately to pull it out, Dee sprang at his chest. Gilson instantly vanished. He'd used his ability to teleport, and it put him right behind Dee. However, Dee wasn't there. He too had vanished. Gilson suddenly stood stock still in astonishment, and Dee appeared right by his chest. The hunter's bloodied hand seized the hilt that jutted from the nobleman's chest, and Dee pushed with all his might. The blade of the sword protruded from the Duke's back. Gilson's body was enveloped by purplish smoke. Within the smoke, a sort of mass began falling away in chunks. Chunks of skin, of flesh. The disintegration of Duke Gilson had begun. "He's melting?" Lurie said, his eyes riveted, and with good reason. In its death throes, the enormous body let off countless jets of wildly dancing purple smoke, and when they touched the castle walls or floor, the stony material was instantly reduced to sludge. "Dee, if the castle wall melts and the snow melts, the village will be flooded," the boy wailed mournfully. "Dee, Dee," called out a voice that could only be Gilson's. "Ah, Dee, I am undone. How did you slay me? The light in your eyes, was that, could it be, the power the sacred ancestor gave you? Dee, I didn't ultimately triumph over the sacred ancestor, did I? Please tell me that's not so." His voice grew thin, and the giant collapsed. Purplish smoke enveloped his golden cape, dissolving it. It, and everything else. Dee ran over to Lurie, tucked him under one arm, and raced for the castle wall. "Shut your eyes. Here we go." The two of them jumped. On the same drift of snow where Lilia and Vera had previously landed, Dee lightly came to rest. He should have sunk down past his knees, but the snow didn't even come up to his ankles. It was a matter of the way Dee carried himself. "Dee, the village." It was unclear what the hunter made of Lurie's words, as he didn't so much as move an inch. shrouded in purple smoke up to its very zenith, and the castle was swiftly vanishing like something out of a nightmare. As it collapsed, it touched the snowy slope where Dee and the boy stood, and at that instant, a dazzling light colored the world. Even Dee had to lower the brim of his traveler's hat, while Levi was briefly blinded. When the world finally began to etch itself into the boy's retinas again, he said, "The castle's gone." Gilson's castle had vanished without a trace. "And no avalanche or flood either," Dee remarked. He was right. The snowfield where the castle had stood had only collapsed a bit around the edges, but otherwise retained its original shape. The disappearance of the castle was like waking from a dream, and it had occurred without the need for any energy at all. As he stood there dumbfounded, Levi noticed that Dee had turned around and was facing the other way. The composed relief that filled the boy's heart at first allowed him to sense the presence of someone behind him. Could it be Dad? Though snow continued to fall, there was no wind. 4 figures stood behind a veil of white silk gauze. One of them stepped forward, taking on definite shape and color. It was Lilia. The boy stared at her, and then his gaze focused on the remaining 3 figures. Expectation, curiosity, and fear whirled in his eyes. "Is my father there?" "Could be," Lilia said, grinning thinly. "Haven't asked him his name, but I suppose the face bears some resemblance. Nah, it's probably just my imagination. Dee, those 2 in the back of here are in dust." Not a word from the hunter. The man the boy thinks is his father seems to have the same condition I do. While he was bitten by Gilson, he didn't become a servant, but kept wandering outside the castle. He knew how he'd be treated if he were to go back among the people, and more than that, he wasn't sure he could control his own actions. He says he doesn't remember when or how he came to be here. He also forgets whether or not he had any kids. Lurie looked up at the hunter. "Goodbye, Dee," he said. Dee's hand closed on the boy's shoulder. "It's okay, Dee," said a shadowy figure through the snow. "The doctor," Lurie began before calling out her name. "Dust and I will guarantee the child's safety. We'd like Lurie here, too." The boy swallowed hard. "We were bitten by a man who came up the mountain with your father, but it's okay. We stopped at the victim stage, and neither Dust nor I have come under the control of that man." "I don't believe that." "Please believe it. I have an idea. Dee, come stay with us for 3 days. After that, we'll disappear into the mountains. If you think we're acting strangely, or any time you like, please go ahead and kill us." "What'll you do in those 3 days?" "Teach this child what I know," Vera said, her voice quavering with hope. "I can't go back to the village any longer. I'll live in the mountains with Dust. We know Gilson's being destroyed, but we just can't go back to being human. Probably because of his alien blood. But it could be years before the next doctor comes to our village. In the meantime, this child will be their doctor. Dee, I was bitten by this man here, but he was bitten by Gilson. And being a doctor, I was able to absorb the alien medical knowledge that Gilson's blood carried. In 3 days, I'll be able to help the child master medical techniques unknown to mankind." Snow struck Dee and the boy on the cheeks. The wind had begun to blow. "Just 3 days, Dee. And someday he'll go to the capital. When he does, the human race will begin to learn a new kind of medicine. At the hands of this child, won't that be wonderful?" "Leave it to us, Dee," the figure who was apparently Dust said, nodding. Dee's response came quickly. "What'll you do?" he asked Levi. The boy's decision was also swift. I'm going with them, he said, with a firm nod. He was a child of the frontier, and though he was afraid, he still had hope and believed in himself. I think I'll keep you company. The two of them started walking. Levi turned and looked, raising one hand to the rooted Lilia. Goodbye, miss. Waving back with a wry grin, Lilia could only watch through the gusting snow as the tall man's shadowy form faded from view. This isn't the end, you know, Lilia said, putting her right hand against the white scarf. I'll thank you to remember who gave me one of these kisses. Someday, we'll meet again somewhere, out on the frontier. When we do, if I've become one of the nobility, I'll die by your hand. The huntress's voice melted into the snow. All the human shapes were swallowed up by the whiteness, and shortly thereafter, the sole remaining figure turned around and buried herself in the snow that even now continued to fall. The end. Vampire Hunter D, White Devil Mountain, End.